Hello everyone, Eric here from Liquid TV, and I'm extremely excited to be bringing you the PUBG Global Championship pre-show, and there's a lot to unpack for this weekend's game, so let's just jump right into it. Alright, so before we really jump into PGC itself, I want to go over PDL Phase 3, which was a real roller coaster for Team Liquid fans, and the only way to really start understanding this is just to take a look at what our weekly placements look like. So we had a really strong start in weeks 1 and 2, but it was quickly followed by a difficult period in weeks 3 and 4 with some uncharacteristically low point totals. But the team did a really phenomenal job here bouncing back. Weeks 5 and 6 we had some insane games. There was multiple 15 kill first places, and it really just culminated in the final days being really tight. We kept closing the gap against FaZe, and ultimately we didn't quite get there. We didn't quite take first, but the final game was just a really wild and exciting game for Team Liquid fans. We just kind of ran at FaZe really early, and there was just this weird fight between FaZe, TSM, and Team Liquid. And to me, I think this phase was just one of the most exciting we've seen in a long time. And while not taking the PEL title might have been a little bit disappointing for some fans as well as the players, I think there's a lot of positives that we can take away here. So the most exciting prospect for me right now is how well the team adapted and how good they were at adapting and just realizing their mistakes. And you can see that each player was really working towards a team goal here. So if we take a look at the stats, the first thing that's really going to jump out here is Samty, who's in my opinion probably currently the best player in the world. And though he's not necessarily thought of as our team's star fragger, he did have a great season. He managed to take second place overall for kills despite having 2 really rough weeks here. And Ibiza did a fantastic job at adjusting his role to kind of suit how well Samty was playing. So Samty and Jeems still mostly kind of sharing the in-game leader role here and being the most vocal. But again, the great part about the flexibility on Team Liquid is that each player in this squad is capable of taking control and making calls, which is really important. So I've even decided to include 17 here because I think the role of the coach at a short international tournament is going to be really critical to any team's success, and having a good coach can really make the difference between us walking away with the PGC title or leaving empty-handed. So his stats are admittedly somewhat arbitrary, but they are all traits that I think 17 has really put to good use within the squad. So he mentioned in an interview with Team Liquid when he was picked up that mentality is an extremely important aspect of the game, and when you're in this scenario of you have this really short time period of a global championship, you really can't linger on these losses that were maybe, you know, just luck or whatever it might be. You have to curb that difficult loss into a positive experience, and that's something that I think 17 is really going to help us with. Similarly, he's been a really integral part in working with the team on cohesion. So while Samty was our star fragger in PEL Phase 3, that might not necessarily be the case going forward into PGC. So if somebody else steps up as the fragger and Samty needs to move his position to something different, you know, 17 is going to be able to help with the cohesion and making sure that everybody's really falling into place. So with the squad overview and PEL Phase 3 behind us, we can kind of start looking at PGC. And the first thing we kind of have to jump into is going to be the group stage. And I think although we have 15 really strong teams around us, there's 4 I really want to highlight. I think it's really easy to make an argument that we're in the group of death here. We've got OGN Force, we've got Detonator Korea, and we've got Africa. 3 really strong teams coming from that Korean region. And then on top of that, we've got Atletico. So Atletico did come second in the Oceanic qualifier, so they do look a little bit weaker perhaps than when they were at GLL. It is a slightly different squad, but I do think that they've shown at GLL it is the same core of players, that they're capable of really adjusting to an international meta and stepping up when they need to. So I think at least 2 of these teams alongside us are probably going to be top 5 in this tournament. And despite that, I am confident we'll get a top 8 in this group relatively easily moving into the semifinals. So with all that being said, it's not really a negative that we have such a strong group. Instead, it's something that we can kind of look forward to. You know, if we're expecting a lot of the teams in our group to move on to the later portions of the tournament, it'll be great to kind of get that practice in against them to kind of understand how they play, and most notably how the drops are going to play out, because it really wouldn't be an international tournament without Team Liquid being contested at multiple drops. So taking a look at the maps, we've got some pretty strong competition here at Pachinki. OGN Force, Detonator, and Genesis are all potential squads that we could meet here. Team Liquid, of course, being as hot-headed as they are, they don't want to leave that drop spot. So really, I think probably Detonator is going to move away from here. They've avoided OGN Force at this location if they're in the same lobby. But Genesis has made it pretty clear on social media that they're really not willing to move anymore. They have in previous events. They were the original Cloud9 roster, which did clash with us a couple times. But we've seen that when we have these contested drops, Team Liquid is still really capable of fighting with, perhaps less loot or a little bit of a scrappier start. So either one of these Korean teams staying or Genesis is going to put a lot of pressure on our early game. But ultimately, I do think it's something that we can really work through and potentially bring it as a positive if we can pick up a couple extra points at our drops. The same thing happens again if we look over here at Picado. There's a notable lack of the strong Korean teams, but we're going to see potentially Genesis and Sun Sister contesting us here. Genesis especially might be looking to establish some more stability in their play. If they do eventually plan on moving away from Pachinki, they could use a less contested drop in Miramar to return to a game plan that they're a little bit more comfortable with. Despite that, I do think that Team Liquid's still going to do relatively well here. If we do end up fighting Genesis, it'll probably just end up being a couple of free points for us, but ultimately I do think, again, the early game is going to be really contested for Team Liquid. Outside of just our group though, FaZe and T1 are going to be the two stronger teams that we're going to have to watch out for. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of assume who's going to make it out of their group and kind of pass that elimination stage, so I don't really want to dig too much into that. But luckily we do have a lot of experience against FaZe. They're kind of our rival in Europe, something I've touched on in GLL, of course. But ultimately, I do think that we do have a lot of experience against them, especially at the end of Phase 3. We kind of tried to throw them off. We studied them a lot. So I think going into PGC, that's going to be really helpful as we get into the later stages of that tournament. Now, we do have less direct experience against T1, but again, I do think one of the benefits of our group is that we're playing against strong Korean teams, and that just might help us build some understanding of the Korean style of PUBG as we face them in these later stages of the tournament. So I think that's going to be really helpful for us. Again, NPL could be a relatively strong region. They did underperform in GLL, so it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of adapt to an international meta, something that it seemed like they really couldn't do at GLL. Tempo Storm still looking like a strong team despite how well they didn't play at GLL. Lazarus is looking relatively strong as well. And then of course our rivals Genesis. I do expect all those teams to kind of make it into the later stages, so those are probably going to be teams that we see more of. Genesis especially, they're in our group. We're probably going to meet them in semifinals, potentially even grand finals. And that could become an issue for us if they really do heavily contest our drops. And then so ultimately it does seem like the main theme of PGC this year is going to be adaptation. How well can teams really adapt to the international meta, to potentially being pushed out of their drop spot? How well are they going to be able to adapt to teams being more aggressive or less aggressive than what they're used to? And as I mentioned earlier, that adaptation and that willingness to be flexible are the real strengths of Team Liquid. They were really able to adapt at the end of PDL Phase 3. I'm sure they're going to be able to carry that over into PGC. And then that flexibility among the players. We don't really rely on one star fragger. We don't really rely on one player to make the calls. So, if somebody does get picked off early on, it's not really shaky ground for us. We have a solid foundation of players. And that's something that's going to be really important, because even if we get down to these scenarios where we have one player left, like we saw at GLL, we're really capable of squeaking out another few kills for some more points, or just getting ourselves into these good positions so that we can get some placement points. And that's going to be something that's really important to really gain that edge over the other teams in PGC. Altogether, I think Team Liquid fans have a lot to look forward to this weekend. It's going to be a really exciting tournament right out of the gates. There's not a huge threat of elimination in the group stages, so I think it's fair to assume that a lot of teams are going to be playing aggressively. Outside of that, I think placement expectation-wise, we're definitely a top 3 team here. I do fully believe that we're the best team at the tournament, and we can look to just add another trophy to our trophy case. The games start this Friday, they continue on the weekend of the 16th, and then the grand finals are on the weekend of the 23rd. I fully expect we're going to be in games every single weekend into the grand finals, and I just think that all Team Liquid fans should really tune into this. It's going to be a lot of fun whether or not you play or understand PUBG. There's a really low barrier for entry. It's really exciting to watch. We've got a really talented, really likable squad, and I really hope you guys all tune in.